here we are. This is so cool. We are lighting the candle and creating a world that works just through talking to each other. We're in the process of really engaging ourselves to create empowerment, encouragement, engagement. And earlier we were just talking about empathy and what it is, what it seems like, what it can be. And I posed the question as to whether or not it could actually be the sixth sense, the one that it gives us our how we learn by understanding and feeling, and by sharing other people's, their current experience. When we experience that, does it grow us? So with that said, again, I'm Bill Carell, and I've got my dear friends Ken, Lisa, also Vanessa on the phone, and then my dear buddyette Shelly. And I call attention to Shelly because I just really wanted to feel spoiled and come back more often. Okay? All right, so now you know my ulterior motive. So Ken, did you have anything else that you wanted to say with regard to, that certain talents are actually something that you can work on increasing up to a level? Was there anything in addition to that thought?
I think there's just a great resource for that is Carol Dweck's work. She wrote the book Mindset, and the whole concept behind it is a lot of times we have varying levels of fixed and growth mindset. And fixed is when we've like it used to be that boys were better at math than girls, that was just a thing, or whatever it was. You had some kind of a belief in whatever you were born with was just what you had. And they spent invested a lot of time in researching what happens when you just helped educate a student to the fact that they're capable of growing a skill. Regardless of where they are, they can grow it, and they may not be the best at that thing ever. That's okay. There's growth that's available to them. So I think that that just kind of stems into this whole idea of whatever your current level of empathy is, it's something that you can cultivate and grow through tending to it and paying attention to it, just like any other skill. And you may not be a super high, incredibly intuitive empath in your life, but you can have more empathy. And the other thing that struck me is I wonder if empathy is relative to the level of trust and connection you have with the person you're experiencing it with. So is a mom going to have a much higher degree of empathy with her child than she will with someone else's child? Or does that translate over into what degree? So I figured I'd just throw that out there as something worth considering.
I think there's meat on them bones, no doubt about it. Lisa, what are you thinking?
Well, the other thought that came to mind is I was listening to the gentleman that teaches effortless mindfulness, and he talks about thinking as being the sixth sense. Thinking
what? T-H-I-N-K?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. So, because our awareness is one big, our soul, however you want to refer to it as, our awareness as an entity outside of our physical being depends on how we interact with people too. So that plays into empathy and intuition and everything else. So if you are aware that your soul is affected by everything and anything around, any energy around you, which the whole world is made up of energy. So, the more in tune you are with your interaction with other things, the more you can perceive them and the more you can work with them. So, and even the 5 sights that we have, like we put those of us that have eyesight put a very huge emphasis on sight into what our reality is. So, and he does a little example of like how you hearing comes to you, feel like it comes to you, but sight, you feel like you snatch it when it's all the same kind of physical response. It's a response to something from your brain into your brain. And he thinks thinking is that way too. So, I just wanted to throw that out there to throw a wrench into everything.
This is burning. I have to respond to both of those. I'm going to make him right. And what I'm going to say is the thinking that he's talking about is not the having thoughts that most of us experience. There is a distinction of what thinking is as a practice. it's a creation. It has, mass, and it also is very active and engaging. And so to distinguish thinking from having thoughts, first of all, to make him right, that's worth a lifetime of really spending time on, in conversation, in meditation, all of those things that give you access to possible future experiences that inform you about your own life and your own self. So then the other thing that you said, which I kind of forgot because, but at the same time, with all of the energy that's in between us, the notion of having a sixth sense for most people is very foreign. I do remember now. I have a friend who I was in his presence at one point. He's blind. He has been blind from birth. And he walked into a situation where I was with him, and he had dark glasses on and a white cane. And a woman came over to him, a woman who he'd never met before, and just walked up to him, and she started crying. And she said, I don't know who you are. She said, but you remind me of that little guy on the Christmas Story, where he gets even with the rest of the family because they won't let him get a BB gun. And then he turns blind, and they're all crying and sobbing on the floor. And she said, that just really touches me. And he said, you don't need to shed a tear for me. He said, I feel bad for you. You process the world through your vision. I process my world through all the other senses. I hear and I smell and I taste things that you will never experience in your lifetime. I can tell you where the inanimate objects are in the room. You can't tell me without looking. He said, so I want to ease your mind. I want to take care of you in this situation, and thank you for your caring, but you may want to find another target for it because I'm perfectly fine the way I am. Thank you. Very powerful. Mm-hmm. Like I'm doing one of these, it's like, wow. No, I've never heard anybody even, say to him, I noticed that you're blind. And that was his response to it. So he was just, very cool guy. Those were the two things. I was on fire about him. I had to get him out. Okay. So Vanessa or Shelley, either one of you have a reaction to what we're talking about here and what Ken posed? Is empathy something that is present in all cases, or is it something that may have maybe a tuner in it that works better with some people and not others?
I'm going to go with the 4-minute mile, because we're all born with different abilities, features, physically and spiritually, and I tend to refer them to some people. They're gifts, because I wish I could run a 4-minute mile, right? So those who can without a whole lot of exertion or training, that's a gift, and something to embody, right? And to use in the purpose in forwarding their life. So it in me is the same as far back as I can remember as a child, right? I don't know if something happened when I was younger, but I've always been very empathetic, even when I'm watching a movie in the middle of a movie theater, right? So it's not, people look at me like, why are you crying? I'm like, don't you feel that? And they're like, no. So can it be cultivated? I think, again, to what Ken was saying, to a certain extent, absolutely, to which you have that ability, or you are engaging the environment around you. Because even if I sit here, I'm going to do some physical pieces to learn about it, I'm going to read about it, I'm going to engage, I'm going to meditate. Those are all physical things that I have to do to get to where someone who hasn't had to do a thing is already there, right? And they are at the top of the game. So, and I think this just goes along with being human and recognizing that not everybody is at the same level. And they may never be able to get to the level you are, or you're never going to be able to get to the level they are. And just embracing that, who am I to say whether you have a gift of empathy or not to a deeper level than I do, just, by mere virtue of being around them.
Mm-hmm.
It is, to the thought process, I think that's a chain reaction. And I think it's after the empathy kicks in, because empathy is kind of in the different direction, right, of intuitiveness. Intuitive just happens. Your empathy, it kicks in the environment in which you are in, right? You did not bring the empathy here. It kicked in, and it's feeling something and sharing something that is outside of you, but it is coming out of you. And this is where I have, to share and kind of put it out as to exactly what it is. I think everybody has a different way of describing it, but I agree that it's a reaction of thoughts that is literally after the experience. And I'm going to kind of put it as an experience. Now I feel the empath. Now my thoughts are coming, and now, they can kick into that fight or flight, or, do I need to help, or how do I engage in this? Or do I walk away and I kind of put it aside because everything's being taken care of? I may be rambling, but I'm hoping that some of these things kind of, relate. But I Lisa, I think it's, perfect of what you said. And Ken, it's not one thing. It's not one thing.
Yeah. There's another level of making that gentleman right. The only thing with thinking, I think thinking is a group process. I don't know any human being that can sit by themselves without working off of input from somebody else in terms of trying it on, stretching it out of shape. What does it mean? There has to be some give and take, because otherwise, how do you get, thinking is the doorway to what you don't know, okay? As opposed to having thoughts, which is all part of that instinctual stuff that you're born with, and your experience gives you, nature and nurture and all that, up to this minute. So I really would pose that what if thinking and empathy, they positively, absolutely have to be a group phenomenon of at least two people.
Oh, absolutely. Empathy is not something that you experience on your own.
Right.
That would be sensitivity.
Right, but what we're talking about is two competing sixth senses here. And I'm really very interested in the thinking metaphor, What does that mean? What does the word thinking represent in terms of a sensual access to the world and the universe and all of the, all in all, we are all one. That whole concept of there is no me without you, okay?
So you're saying it takes something else or someone else for the thinking to start. So I could sit here and my phone would go off, or then I would start thinking. So you're saying it's a thinking is a reaction from someone else or something else?
I'm really interested in a working definition of what thinking would look like in terms of being, in a sense, we usually look as kind of an I/O function, input and output. Mm-hmm. That's what a sense typically is. And how does thinking fall into that? So you got to give me the book name and Lisa, and I've got to do a little bit more research on this subject. I'm very small.
Yeah, and I think it's more like an interaction, because I'm thinking, I can be thinking, and the other person I'm dealing with is the other part of me.
Yes.
So there's that.
I'm not really out here. You're very right about that.
So it's still an interaction with somebody else. It's just another aspect of me.
But
That's
if-
exactly right, because it's always from the skin in. No matter what our experience of the world is, it reflects what we already know to some degree until it destroys what we already know and replaces it with some new, some new really brilliant thing to know or to experience, right? I'm making this up as I go along. It's the best I can do on short notice.
I was going to say the thinking thing is interesting because who are you as a thinker? And it is just what struck me was there's an essential difference, as it was explained to me, between the way a Western approach to like the universe and the Eastern approach. The Western approach is the universe is knowable. The Eastern approach is the universe is unknowable and it's observable.
Right.
So as a thinker, are you like, you're thinking to understand something, or are you thinking to observe something, process it, and allow an understanding to manifest from that? There are two different approaches. And it's interesting, I think, if you keying it into empathy, if you observe a feeling in someone else and you think you know that feeling and you know them and you try to tell them that can really get someone angry, especially if you're like doing that to, your female partner and you start telling them you know what they're feeling. It's not going to go well, right?
Well, no, it all depends, okay?
However, if you can observe it,
Yeah.
and and you're like, I'm feeling this from you. Is that true for you? That's a very different understanding. So they're both a thinking process, but where are you starting from? Like who are you in that process of thinking?
All right. Yes, and I learned this from Charlie Sheen, so it has to be true.
Right.
The answer to any feelings statement from a woman is, I understand. No matter what it is, just keep saying, I understand.
I thought it was you're right.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience with you're right, but I've been doing I understand for about 5 years, and it seems to get me out of many a tight spot.
So I could give a little bit of input on that, just from the perspective of in my business. I tend to have a lot of women that gravitate towards it because it's a very caring, nurturing environment. So, and when there's an emotional reaction, like a frustration, to whatever's going on that we're trying to work through, it's usually I'm listening, help me understand. Because if I say I understand, sometimes no, you don't. So, and it's just kind of interesting how there's that I'm observing and I'm listening, and and I'm willing to put in the energetic effort to understand. And I think that a lot of times, even if there is an understanding at the end of it, that act of being willing to understand. And I think that in the end, this is where empathy becomes very powerful, because even if I don't understand, if I can tune into how the other person's feeling, that tends to, basically add more trust to the relationship, which means that probably in the future there will be better understanding, or at least the possibility of it. So.
Yeah, and that's where most men fail, because they're trying to logically get a story that makes sense to them to understand, as opposed to the logical and the sensitivity of the feelings and all that. So they're two different kinds of things, and a lot of men, especially older than me, never were really taught how to take the time to work on the feeling side. So.
Yeah, and it definitely, I noticed a tendency to want to fix it, and I had to learn to rest in the discomfort of this maybe not being fixable by me, and really what I need to do is, we had all these different avatars that we would use. So, drop into the sounding board avatar, where I'm here to listen and reflect it back. And it would be incredible to watch someone, and this wasn't a female or male thing, just watch them go through the process of whatever they were dealing with and talk themselves to the answer,
Sure.
where it was just, I was there as just the dynamic to kind of facilitate that. But they already knew, they just needed to clarify it and get to the right questions until the answer came to them. You know, my favorite ones are when they'd have an entire conversation, I'd barely even say anything, and then they're like, okay, I'm good.
You always have the best ideas,
Right.
Ken.
Yeah.
I feel better after every time I talk with you. I think
Yeah.
that's great. So we're getting to the no, we're actually not. Forgive me. I'm looking at the time here. We probably got close to 10 more minutes. However, Vanessa, you have been very, very quiet. Are you out there?
Yeah, no, I don't mind that at all. I love listening to everything everyone's saying, just taking it in. I will say that I liked the most recent conversation you guys were having about saying, I understand, you know, when someone's going through something. And one of the things I say is, I've started to say is, I hear you. And of course, I'm trying to say to them without the words. I'm trying to say to them
Sure.
without using the words, I understand. I'm trying to show the understanding, which then reflects back, you know, maybe some empathy or at least sympathy. But, you know, one of the things I find my saying, I mean, even if it's just texting someone, but usually just, you know, if someone's complaining to me or just sharing, venting, whatever the case, and I'll say, I hear you. And because I don't want to offer up an I'm sorry, because maybe it's not something that warrants an apology. It's not something from me. I'm sorry can reflect also empathy or sympathy, but it depends on the situation. If someone's dog just died or their close relative, you could say, I'm sorry, you know, or something along those lines. But if someone's just venting something, you know, I'll say, I hear you. And it's the equivalent, I think, Bill, of what you're saying, where you say to your wife, I understand.
Yeah.
But I also like, I believe it was Ken that was saying that, well, just in general, or you were saying that sometimes, you know, you'll say to someone, I understand, and then they'll say to you, no, you don't. And so then there creates a tension, and so then what's the next best thing to say there? And then the other thing is, sometimes it's good to say, to show someone that you're hearing them by just listening to them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. Sometimes no words are needed. And I think Ken, you also touched on that, but sometimes no words are needed. I mean, what's therapy, right? You go in, you sit down for an hour, and the therapist says, so tell me about your week, tell me about your day. And you just talk and talk and talk and talk. And all of a sudden, you know, you sort of come up with your own answers, and the therapist has really not said anything, but maybe nodded and took a few notes and then sent, you know, I'll bill you for X amount of dollars. I'm glad you figured out your own problem. That's what I'm here for, right? But so it's amazing how just our presence, just knowing that someone is hearing us, and knowing that we have an audience to vent our frustrations or to complain or just to share our opinions, knowing that there's some kind of audience on the other side is just enough for the healing to begin, you know, and no words are needed really. And you can show that understanding without even saying, I hear you, I guess, without even saying anything.
So now what you're talking about might possibly be called being empathetic. That's where you actually show,
right.
You know, that's where you actually show that you are experiencing, sharing the feelings of another person.
I'm going to throw a wrench in that. That's sympathy in my world. So there's this the line between being sympathetic and empathetic. There's a whole world there. Sympathetic is the experiential piece of it. Empathetic is, you know, here we go with that innate awareness of a situation that's outside of you.
So sympathy is to hold somebody else as a damaged human being. You know, like that's like the worst case, but they are less than in this moment and they need help. That's, I'm translating, you know, in the worst possible way. Sympathy is feeling something inside of you that says, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Okay? Quite different than empathy, which is to be actively listening, actively feeling, actively engaged, and receiving. Does that make sense? I always like to try to distinguish when two things seem to be collapsing. And maybe
Yes,
there's more you can say.
Yes, and I agree. I'm thinking of Brene Brown. I think she's been mentioned on this podcast before, but her excellent video and talk on vulnerability, and just where she had a video with the sympathy. I'll be honest with you, sympathy and empathy are two. I guess sometimes they can overlap, but I think that generally they are two separate ways of thinking. I'll use the term thinking because we were talking about that before.
Yep.
And I do personally, I struggle with the exact definitions of the two of them often. But Brene Brown's talk on vulnerability, just to give you a visual example, she distinguished sympathy from empathy, and one of them where she had used these cartoon characters, and she had someone that had fallen into, it was a goat or something that had fallen into a ditch, and he was deep down in the cave or in the ditch, and the character who was being sympathetic leaned over the ditch and said, "Hey, wow, sorry you fell in there. You want a sandwich or something? I really," he did, and then the character that then showed the empathy actually crawled down into the ditch with this character.
Yeah.
And, said, "Hey, it's going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here. We'll get out of here, get out together." And so that was kind of a very extreme example because the other character actually put themselves into that exact same situation, but that really is how to define empathy, is that you're feeling, I guess it's best defined as walking in someone else's shoes, right? So
what if empathy is an act of, Vanessa?
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
What if empathy is an act of partnership and sympathy is, in other words, sucks to be you?
Yeah, I think it's just head-based versus heart-based. Yeah, I mean, sympathy is when you can understand it on an intellectual level and express, whatever towards them. But empathy is when you can feel what they're feeling in your own way. So there's a heart-based connection, whereas sympathy is just, you can't really connect to it on an emotional level, just on a intellectual level.
I would say, what if sympathy is relating to it in your own way, and empathy is relating to it truly in the way of the person expressing, what's going on.
I like that.
Now.
Yep.
See what I'm saying?
So
you can put it on and it fits you. I like this. Go ahead, Vanessa.
So then this brings up the two definitions of empathy versus, or empathic versus empathetic.
Yes.
Those are, I also get confused. Empathic is where you can actually feel those emotions, right? Like to the point where you can physically feel someone's pain, even though you're not actually the one having the pain inflicted on them, right? So
hang on just a second. What if empathic actually means a paranormal ability? I think they have distinct. I think if you look up empathic, it's quite different than empathetic.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I think I just wanted to make that distinguish that first. So we're talking about empathy and being empathetic or versus sympathetic. We're not talking about empathic ability. Okay.
Not yet.
That's not for the listeners.
Empathy and sympathetic have that same gap that empathy and empathetic or being an empathetic person have, because sympathetic is the experience of I've been where you are. It's an experiential thing that you've gone through.
Yeah.
But yet you're still not feeling the pain they are, but you understand where they've been. Sympathy is that guy offering, the person in the ditch a sandwich, saying, I'm sorry you're there. I really am, but there's nothing I can do. Or intellectually, I don't, Same with the empathy and empathetic. One is a very deep feeling outside of yourself, paranormal, energy, whatever that is coming through you is not of actually a control of you. But having empathy is a level of that, right? But it's just not on the same 4-minute mile. This is, you got a 4-minute mile and you got a 12-minute mile.
Yes.
So that's, I'm just looking at that gap, going that those two are very synonymous.
And staying with that metaphor, what if empathy is, to the running as the 4-minute mile is to being an empath?
Mm-hmm.
There are many people who can just walk into a situation and silently receive messages, silently receive. It doesn't come through in words. It just comes through in an experience. It's like when I wrote what I wrote, there have been moments in my life where I felt so close, to the eternal source of energy. And there have been times when it's been completely distant from me. And I say that those two extremes had to do with how much work I was doing in creating myself as someone who could be a good receiver. And so empathy, being an empath, kind of an interesting, maybe that's another whole show. Who knows?
I think we're up to 8 senses now.
What's that?
I think we're up to 8 senses.
Yeah, at least 8 or 9. Let's just keep going, But I'd like to leave this on a very powerful note. What if the solution to all the world's problems is to hand them a ham sandwich?
Why not?
That's something we can all be trained to do in a heartbeat.
Yep.
Any last thoughts from anyone?
All I could think of was I don't like ham, but I do. But I just thought
That reminds me of a movie that I watched a movie called Night in Miami, and what it was about was 4 1960s leaders, Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and Malcolm X getting together for an evening. They lost me with all the conversation and everything, but what I really thought was cool was a couple of the guys said they were not going to convert to being a Muslim because they loved their grandmother's ham too much. Anyhow, well, that's another Thursday in the books, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your energy, your time, and your laughter.
Thank you. Great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, everybody have an amazing week, and come back and see us again next Thursday. And I also want to just put a plug out there. We will be going out platforming this podcast in a lot of different directions during the month of February. You'll be able to find us on Apple Play. You'll be able to find us on Google Podcasts, whatever. And boy, this is very exciting. All right, bye for now, ladies and gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.